Okay, now you're ready to begin your 6x6 checkerboard Afghan. As long as you've already measured out either half of the yarn from 3 skeins, so you're working with 6 strands, or you could work with 6 skeins and use about half of the yarn. So that your Afghan is 6 strands of yarn, and you're going to put on 44 stitches on the 1/2 inch pipe if you want it to look like mine. And this 6x6 checkerboard then is a multiple of 12 plus 6 is how the pattern is written, and with 2 extra stitches for the slip stitch edge. This is a better version than what I showed you in lesson 38. So rows 1 through 6, I've transposed this, by the way, from a pattern for straight knitting needles. So all I did was I reversed the stitches on the even numbered rows. And the pattern actually becomes easier. So the first 6 rows, you're going to do exactly the same thing. Slip the first, front stitch 6, back stitch 6, and then repeat that all the way across. You'll have 7 boxes of stitches of little stockinette sections. You'll have 7 across the row. And when you get down to the last 7, you'll front stitch 6 and have 1 more left for your back stitch. Now, because of this slipped edge, you can see here that this makes a chain that is looser and longer than the stockinette sections, the knit stitches of your stockinette sections, and so those can be baggy if you're not careful. You want to make sure you pull up a bit on the second stitch of each row, and you'll do that for 72 rows, and directions will be in the body of my description as always. So let me just show you how it would look if you did not do the slip stitch edge. You don't have to. This is 12 stitches just done in a 4x4, and so each of these squares is 4 stitches across and 4 rows deep, and you can see they alternate. And I didn't do a slip stitch edge, and you notice that there's little knots on the edge, and they're not the same, and they're kind of firm. I wouldn't say they're hard, but they're bulky, and I don't think they're that attractive. But again, this will create a baggier edge. So just be aware of that. You need to watch out for that. So I'll show you what to do. So we're basically going to steal a stitch. Since there's only 12 on here, we're going to steal a stitch from each edge so I can show you the slip stitch edge. And all you need to do, we're in the second row, by the way, of the second set. How do I know that? Because when you look at your purl side of the stockinette, remember each side is the knit side and the purl side. That is 1 row of stitches and a second row of stitches. And now I know I need to knit row 3. So our slip stitch edge, you always want to start with the yarn up as if to back stitch and take off the first stitch and turn it so that the stitch, in other words, I took it off this way and I'm just flipping it over on itself so that the stitch is pointed towards the empty pipe. If you're helping a child do this, you might explain, well, that looks like a horse face with a little noseband, and put it on the next pipe. Now, the next stitch I know is a back stitch, and this is where you need to pull up on this stitch when you make it. It won't help to really pull on this one because as you're making this next stitch, it'll loosen up all by itself. So the time to pull up on it is when you make the second stitch. Pull the new yarn, the working yarn through. So this is the new stitch, and if you pull on the side of the stitch that is going around the pipe, you can see that tighten. Now, pipe it. And that will help to firm up that edge so it's not so loose. It will be loose enough as it is on these big pipes. So there's our 4th. I like to make all my stitches under the pipes, but I got really confused making this. Not confused, I think I just, you go into automatic pilot and you forget what you're doing. So you want to make sure that you're making the stitches all the same way so at least your visual cues are the same. And if you have your stitch, your old stitch bent towards you, you're really seeing the top of the row on the other side. So, I always say that's the V is on the other side, but I know that that's not a back stitch because I don't see a bow tie sign. If you're used to knitting that way, stick with that. And there's one more. And so that also is a front stitch. And now the next section is back stitches. And when I take it off to knit it below, I see the bar. And that bar is really on the other side of the knitting. I'm just seeing it bent over, so I know I need to make another one. And at the end of every row, you will make a back stitch. Again, we're stealing this stitch, but it's a back stitch anyway. And when you start the next row, you're going to slip it in the same way you did on the last row. So just take your yarn up as if to back stitch and take the stitch off like so. Again, point it at the empty rod so that it looks like a horse head with a little noseband over it. You can tell your daughter or son, and pipe it. And the next stitch is a back stitch. And make sure, this is where I started going automatic pilot there. The second stitch, make sure you're pulling on the side of the new stitch that is going up here and around this pipe. And when you do, you'll see that tighten up. Give it a pretty firm, depending on how stretched your yarn is, give it a pretty firm pull. And when you do, that will make that edge look so much nicer. And now we'll knit 4. So be sure and look at my video how to fix the mistakes when you're knitting, and I'll show you a little something too when we finish this row. In fact, we'll show you right here. So these next stitches will be back stitches, and I just did front stitches. So let's take this off and take a look at it. And you can see when I do the front stitches, I'm seeing the bars or the purl side of the fabric. Now, when I showed fixing the stitches in lesson 43, I showed them from the perspective of having the knit side of the stockinette, this side. And I showed it as a back stitch, but it's the same, whether you just have to work it from the other side of the stitch, and I'll show you. So let's pull some out. So we'll say we're going to take out that one, and that one, and that one. So now that leaves us with basically a ladder of yarn that we've removed. Here's one row and a second row. So here's a stitch, and you can see the bar across, and I know that was a front stitch. So if I want to correct that and make it a front stitch again, let's say I had a mistake where I come in the wrong side, then all I want to do is hold this stitch in my hand, and I want to make sure that I have the yarn that's for the next row, not the top row, but the row in succession. Now put it down below the stitch and push it through from front to back, and when you do, that old stitch that you just had in your fingers will fall forward, and that makes the purl side of the fabric. You'll see the bar. Now you have one more row to put back in. Bring it over to the front again, and again push it from front to back. You're making a front stitch, and the yarn falls forward, and you have a stitch, and you say to yourself, uh-oh, where do I put it? Do I put it over here or here? You don't want to put it where you have the yarn. These are following new stitches, so put it back over there. You know you were front stitching, and that's how you would fix a front stitch. So it's just the opposite of what I showed in lesson 43. Just in case you were wondering, I didn't actually show it that way. I just said it. So, and again, you're going to back stitch no matter what your stitch, whether you're ending with knit stitches or purl stitches. You want to back stitch the last one before you slip it the next time, and it's always pointed towards the empty rod. And make sure that when you make that next stitch, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now we're really going to switch to back stitches because we've already done 4 stitches now of our set. Make sure you, when you make the stitch and you have your new stitch in your hand, pull on the side of the stitch that's going around the pipe. You can see that tighten before you make it. And that will make you a beautiful edge for your 6-hour easy breezy Afghan. Thanks for watching.